Welcome to episode 6 of season 1 of Babylon 5, Mind War. This is going to be a long one. I have a cup of tea and several Jaffa cakes. I said Jaffa, not Jafar, it's not Stargate. Okay, moving on. Arc episode, so please do pay attention. We start with a Black Omega squadron and pay special attention to their insignia. That'll give you a clue for what's going to happen later on. And it's the squadron is approaching a transport vessel, ordering it to surrender and prepare to be boarded. And they duly do surround it, as they get no response from it. Then there's a very mysterious sort of boom, because it doesn't look like a particularly imposing vessel, and yet somehow it emits a very, very bright light, and then the squadron that was chasing it is just gone. So already this seems to be quite a threatening sort of transport ship as transport ships go, and we'll find out why it was that threatening very shortly. Catherine is back on the station in Sinclair's quarters, just trying to head off, a nice towel arrangement on her head there, and she's apparently going to be doing a deal with a megacore, which Sinclair is warning her to be cautious about, but she's quite adamant that she can handle herself, and she probably can because this is her day job. So that's not really a major issue for her. So we switch to outside the station, and lo and behold, a strangely familiar looking transport is requesting docking permission quite politely. And of course, we realise that this is the same one that the Black Omega squadron was trying to take down without much joy just a few moments before. Talia is explaining to a curious client what it means to be a telepath, how it feels, that there's always this sort of background chatter of minds, and that it's always there, but some things are harder to block out than others. And she makes the mistake of getting into a lift with Garibaldi, and Garibaldi's clearly starting to think some rather unclean thoughts about Talia's posterior in the lift, and of course that breaks through her normal defensive barriers, resulting in her giving him a solid thwack to his stomach as she exits the lift with her client. And Garibaldi exclaims as she's leaving that he thinks he's in love, which is lovely if you like that sort of thing. Now, enter the Psi Cops. It's Chekhov. No, it's Walter Koenig. No, it's Bester, actually. This is Bester in this series. Really interesting for me because obviously, it's Walter Koenig. I met him at a convention, or at least I was in close proximity to him at a convention, and for me he's very much associated with Star Trek, as he would be for a lot of people, but by the same token he here is truly playing a very, very, very different character, and it's really nice to see him doing that because it shows that the man has range and that he hasn't been typecast into only appearing on Star Trek and then subsequent Star Trek films. I think I once saw him in Moontrap. Was it called Moontrap? Look it up. It'll be in his filmography. But again, obviously, science fiction typecasting. Yes, sure. But anyway, nice to see him in this and playing a very, very interesting character. We immediately know that they're Psi Corps because their badges are obvious, and their rather funky animated ID badge is clearly carrying the Psi Corps symbol as well. One thing I really like about this little segment with the security guard is the Psi Cops don't speak. Only the security guard speaks. They don't speak at all. They're broadcasting messages to him, but they are not using their lips. And it's kind of obvious yet also subtle, and it's just basically it's telegraphing the fact that they're telepaths. So, okay, that's well established. And they basically said, take me to your leader, which of course he's going to do because they know damn well not to mess with Psi Cops. Catherine's new job is a survey of a planet. Now, I want to say it's a planet called Sigma 957. I think it has to be the planet because it's referred to as if it's the planet. I have to admit, until I watched this episode again, I rather assumed it was the system. But I think it's actually the planet. I think it's a planet designation. And her contact is saying that there are indications of Quantum 40. And if you recall, that actually got her quite a big payout in the last episode that she wanted to celebrate with Sinclair about. And it's established in the course of this conversation that it's used in jump gate construction and in short supply, because jump gate construction is well behind schedule back on Earth. So clearly this is a very lucrative contract for her again, potentially, if they actually find some of it. And Talia is there to ensure that confidentiality is going to be kept by Sakai. And Sakai is pretty pissed off that the suggestion that she might spill the beans to Sinclair just because she's in a personal relationship with him. And her client apologises, but said that he was asked to ask the question with the telepath present. So she obviously agrees to keep things away from him. Talia is satisfied by her answer, and so the deal is on. But as it turns out, there's a little wrinkle. The target planet is in a contested area of space, and so who should turn up but Ambassador Jakar, because his approval is also needed. The Psi Cops now arrive in Sinclair's office, and Sinclair is not a fan of Bester's brain-to-brain communications habits, so he tells him to speak to him if he wants to speak to him. And the body language and the attitude and everything else, and obviously the black outfits, immediately tell us that these Psi Cops are a very different kettle of fish as compared to Talia, who's just a commercial telepath. These guys are quite clearly far more confident and far darker in many respects than she is as a person, and in terms of how they feel about their role in life. So Bester and Miss Kelsey explain that they're looking for a rogue telepath, and whilst normally Sinclair would be correct in that they shouldn't be doing any sort of scans or direct communication with him mentally, they explain that as Psi Cops they get to play around a little bit with the usual Psi Corps rules, so they can basically much do what they need to do in order to get the job done because of who they are. And we discover that there's a good reason for this, because the rogue telepath that they're looking for is clearly going to be an issue. We see Bester's target has rented some quarters on the station and is clearly struggling to control what seem to be telekinetic powers. We then switch back to Bester explaining that this guy's name is Jason Ironheart. Good name, by the way. And he was a trainer at the Psi Corps Academy, and Talia knew him. So he trained P5s through to P10s and is a P10 himself. Interestingly, and I hadn't realised this, I think I thought that P10s were actually the strongest telepaths, but apparently the Psi Cops themselves are actually rated P12, because as Kelsey says, someone has to watch the watchers. Sorry, someone has to watch the others. And Ivona then asks, who watches the watchmen? Which Kelsey doesn't reply to, but sort of isn't impressed by the question. Now, the Psi Cops are claiming that Ironheart was being trained as a covert operative by the military, and so he's in possession of information he intends to sell on to the highest bidder, and it's information that could potentially jeopardise the lives of other covert operatives. That's setting the scene basically for their investigation that follows, and they actually deep scan Talia to check if she's been in contact with him already, because they knew each other, and it isn't pleasant for her. There's no special effects here, so all that's selling the process to us is basically Koenig's acting and Thompson's reaction to his scan, and it does sell it. It works. She's clearly in discomfort, and the Psi Cops are clearly completely focused on double teaming her mentally to penetrate any blocks that she might be trying to put up to understand whether or not he's actually been in contact with her. So it's a very interesting dynamic, because at the end of the day, all three of them are telepaths, but Bester treats Talia like she's cattle, as does Kelsey. So because they're Psi Cops, they clearly see themselves as being superior to other lower powered telepaths. So that dynamic is really interesting, because telepaths are generally viewed as kind of sticking up for one another, but these guys are in a league all by their own as well. So Bester is basically telling Sinclair that everything to do with Ironheart is on a need-to-know basis, and Sinclair doesn't need to know, which is winning him no friends whatsoever, inevitably. And Oliver's not very impressed with him either. So shortly after this meeting, Ironheart makes contact with Talia, knowing that she's now being checked and that it's safe to make contact with her. And he pleads with her to listen to him for a few minutes, because otherwise people are going to die, and possibly himself into the bargain. We then switch over to Sakai literally pursuing Jakar down one of the promenade areas, and she's desperate to understand why he's actually blocking her from going to Sigma 957. And he gives her a very sort of dubious explanation as to why he is concerned about her going there, and that he explains to her that not everyone on the station is not what they seem, basically, but he is actually being sincere when he tells that he really doesn't think that she should go there. She says that she'll go over his head, that she's got her own contacts in the Narn regime, and he basically says, well, so be it, but it's on your head then, and it's not his fault, basically, should anything happen to her. So we then switch back to Ironheart explaining to Talia his view of things, and it transpires that he's been experimented on by Earth Force with the view to effectively doubling his telepathic P rating, so as part of a sort of telepathic arms race experiment. And the experiments weren't very pleasant. He was put into a lot of discomfort day after day, but one day it all kind of worked, it clicked, and at that point he could then cut through any telepathic block that another telepath could put up. But that also meant that he found out what they were really trying to do, which is not just to create a more powerful telepath, but one who is also a stable telekinetic, a TK. And we discovered that telepaths are rare, and TKs are a tiny fraction of them in turn, and most of them are insane. So basically mentally unstable. So being able to create a stable one was something the military was very, very interested in doing. And Ironheart has concluded, given what he's experiencing, that he either has to get away from them or he has to die. And he can't be experimented upon, basically, to be reproduced. Garibaldi has located Ironheart's transport and identified it as stolen, and he's identified that there are 15 newly rented guest quarters since he's arrived. Bester arrives in CNC at the same time, and he clearly scans Garibaldi and notes that 50 quarters shouldn't take too long to search. Garibaldi isn't a fan of Psi Cops, and Bester catches a thought from him and says, "Anatomically impossible, Mr. Garibaldi, but you're welcome to try, any time, anywhere." And that's pretty much sets up the tone of their relationship. Meanwhile, Catherine is heading out to Sigma 957 against Jakar's advice, and travels into the jump gate, having logged her route with CNC. The next scene is interesting because you can take it one of two ways. Jakar announces himself to his communications device as being Jakar of the Third Circle, which is a reference to his position in the sort of the Narn hierarchy, and he requests a direct line to the Narn military, and he requisitions a Frazi class fighter for a mission to Sigma 957, and it's to be well armed. And that's as much as we know at this point. Meanwhile, Ironheart is explaining to Talia that the military didn't want TKs for big things like protecting ships from beam weapons, but for little things. So basically untraceable telekinetic assassinations. And as he becomes agitated about what they actually unleashed in trying to create that, another mindquake starts, and he orders Talia to get clear because he can't control it. So she leaves. And this time around, Sinclair and the Psi Cops feel the quake, and one of the Psi Cops, Kelsey, says, "Mindquake." So the whole station is now on alert, and there's fairly obvious reasons for this, as it turns out, because Ironheart has thrown up a solid 360-degree telekinetic bubble around his location, and no one can get through it. As a result of which Sinclair and Garibaldi then go to seek for some more answers from Bester, because now it is on a need-to-know basis, because they really do need to know. Meanwhile, Sakai arrives successfully in the Sigma 957 system from a local, well, I say system. The jump gate is only 2 hours away from the planet, so I think it's got to be that it's a planet, basically. But I'm still going to think of it as a bit of both. So it's not dissimilar to the Babylon 5 jump gate in that sense, because the Babylon 5 jump gate is in quite close proximity to an individual planet. So when they're placed, they are generally, it seems, somewhere near to a planet. I'm not actually sure if they're even in sort of Lagrange points. That might make a certain amount of sense, but I don't know if there's a reference to that at all. Perhaps someone in the comments can help me out with that one. Sinclair is now asserting himself with the Psi Cops back on the station, and it's quite interesting because now they're slightly on the back foot. Before they were very much lording it over him, but now he's got control of the situation. And Besser admits that Mr. Ironheart is no longer entirely human. And we see that Ironheart is fighting for control with himself, effectively, at the centre of his protective bubble, trying to calm his abilities. Meanwhile, Besser is now becoming a little more forthcoming about the actual level of threat that Ironheart could represent. And at one point in this exchange, if one of us says to the female Psi Cop that, "Lady, you are the situation." Besser says that they need line of sight to try and get through Ironheart's defences, and that if they can do that, then they can enter a shutdown code directly into his brain, which will. I think the implication is that it will sort of put him to sleep, but I'm not sure if she means that in the veterinary sense or in a sort of out and out kill him sense. And if they can't do that, then Sinclair will have to take him down and kill him, basically. Those are the only two alternatives, it seems. So elsewhere in the blue sector, Talia approaches Ironheart's barrier and he lets her get through to her. There's some nice special effects here as well. You know, there's a sort of very clear spatial distortion effect going on around the corridors where the bubble is in place and sort of energy rippling through it. So it's it's selling it quite believably given the effects of the time. And Jason explains to her when she gets to him that he'd hoped that seeing Talia would help him to keep things together and block out the voices. And he says that he never intended to hurt anyone. He says that while the government once controlled the cycle, he can now see that the tables have turned because telepaths, of course, make for excellent blackmailers. And he also says, rather sadly, that there is no more Jason, that he's becoming something else. He's becoming everything. Meanwhile, back in Sigma 957, Catherine is arriving in a parking orbit and she does a passable Jakar impression as she starts getting telemetry from a probe that she's just launched. But despite her rather dismissive attitude towards his warning, we see that there's a spatial distortion opening up near her heavily adapted survey ship, which looks like a standard shuttle but with a sort of an outrigging sensors and so on attached to it. There's a great shot now of something which I think we haven't seen before in this series, which is the travel tube that moves along the central axis of Babylon 5's structure. So it goes, if you think of the area where fresh air is, it's in that area, but it's going right down the middle of the axis of Babylon 5 as a station as a whole. So it's an impressive view, and all this sort of CGI is being generated obviously on a sort of blue screen basis behind them as they travel through, but it's very convincing, and it works well through the scenes that they keep moving as they're both talking. So Talia opens up to Sinclair, who she's asked to speak to privately about Jason's current status. And she explains that she and Jason were lovers, and that she looked up to him as a sort of role model for what a member of the cycle should be. And she's very honest with Sinclair, and she explains that when telepaths make love, all their barriers drop. So it's a sort of an additional layer of intimacy as compared to what normals experience. It's a mixing of souls. It's the only time in a telepath's life when they don't hear any other voices. And she explains that Jason came to say goodbye to her. Catherine at this point could also be saying goodbye as an immense vessel or possibly even a life form, unlike anything that we've seen a conventional spaceship look like in the series so far appears, dwarfing her little survey vessel before turning and vanishing into something that looks like a conventional jump point, but is nowhere near a jump gate and isn't the right sort of colour. But you get the idea that's what it's probably going to something like hyperspace. Difficulty being that Catherine is now dead in the water from the sort of energetic backwash of the UFO's departure, and her orbit is going to decay in 2 hours, and so that's all she's got. She can't open an emergency tachyon faster than light transmission channel to Babylon 5 because she has no energy. There are no other ships in the vicinity, and she has no energy to adjust course to try and bounce off the atmosphere. Basically, she's out of options. Back on the station, Sinclair meets with Ironheart, who's regained control for the time being. He explains that the Psi Corps is all about control, but they didn't realise that mind could control energy, not just matter, and he's crossed that line that nobody's ever crossed before. And he explains to Sinclair that this is a power we were never meant to have, and that he just needs time to finish becoming whatever it is he's going to become. So in C&C, Garibaldi and Ivanova get a message from Sinclair that asks for them to clear a pathway from his current location through to the docking bay so that they can come out. Because Catherine's ship, the Sky Dancer, is about to become the Ground Dancer. But in the nick of time, 2 Narn fighters turn up and say that they're going to grapple her as the skin of the ship starts to warm up. And they explain that they've been sent by Ambassador Jakar of the Third Circle to help her out, much to her surprise, of course. And that, of course, for all we knew, that could have gone the other way. It could have been that Jakar was sending them to bump her off in a nice remote place just to upset Sinclair. But as we'll see later, obviously that wasn't the case. Security starts to clear the path through to the docking bay, but Bester bumps into a couple of them, and it's not clear if he gets the full picture about what's going on, but it's clear that he's not buying their drill story either. So he's putting two and two together. Sinclair and Talia are helping Jason as he moves towards the docking bay, but it's clear that he's struggling to hold it together as they do move. And unfortunately, they get confronted by the Psi Cops on the promenade, and trying to hold off their telepathic attempts to shut him down is causing him to lose control in one of his growth phases, so his powers are starting to cause serious structural damage all around them. Kelsey goes for her gun, but Sinclair has actually punched Bester out to try and stop what they're doing to allow Ironheart to regain control, and she can't go toe-to-toe with him by herself. So as a result, before she can get a shot off, he basically vaporizes her because she won't stand down. Sinclair saves Talia from a falling beam, but in doing so he's left Bester unguarded, and Bester does get a PPG shot off and he hits Jason, but Jason knocks him back with a telekinetic blast. Sinclair says that they should try and get him to sick bay, but Jason says there's no time and he's got to get off the station. So they keep helping him, and before long we see his ship leaving the docking bay, but he doesn't go very far out of the station before it explodes. But Jason has now become, and we see him appear as a sort of being of energy just outside the station's threshold. And he leaves Talia a gift in memory of love. So sort of a beam of energy flows from him to Talia's head, and then she passes out. And finally he says a goodbye to Sinclair as he's lowering Talia to the ground in C&C, and he just says, "Goodbye, Commander. I'll see you again in a million years." So the effects works here is pretty solid. It's we can just about make out what's happened to Ironheart there. So, and we get the clear idea that he's sort of transcended from his physical form at this point, and he's gone somewhere else. It's not dissimilar to the effect that we saw at Sigma 957. Actually, it kind of looks like he transitions off into a point in space and then just sort of blips out. So we find that Sinclair has showed Bester the tape of what's happened as I've just been describing, and Bester doesn't really believe it. And Sinclair says, well, believe it or not, we're going to have an unfortunate data loss incident which is going to wipe these records in an hour or so. And he then goes on to effectively stalemate Bester, because Bester knows that he put the station in jeopardy by his actions, and equally Sinclair wants to protect Talia. So he is saying to Bester, you're going to say that Talia was mind controlled by Ironheart for the duration, so she wasn't responsible for her actions, and in exchange we'll let you off the fact that you endangered the station. So Bester has to settle for this, because obviously he's also lost his partner into the bargain, so he's lost a Psi Cop on his watch. He does this nice little sort of Psi Cop salute and says, "Be seeing you," to Sinclair as he leaves to get on a transport back to Earth. We then switch to Talia's quarters, and we see that she's actually been granted some degree of telekinetic ability by Jason's gift, and I think she's using the same coin that she mentioned earlier in the episode when Jason asked her if she remembered being tested for telekinetic ability as she was going into or out of the academy. And she's obviously kept that coin, and now she can move it a little bit. It's not clear whether or not she ever really sort of uses this again. It's not really massively picked up on, but we know that it was possible for him to obviously transfer this to another telepath. But given that he was wary of his abilities being reproduced, I suspect that he actually just gave her this so that she could kind of experience it a little bit, and then perhaps it faded, or she just couldn't maintain it, because she's only a P5 at the end of the day. There's no indication that she got a sort of a massive boost off the back of it in other ways. So we see Sakai again catching up with Jakar, having successfully returned to the station, and she just asks him why did he help her, and Jakar says, why not? And Sakai says, that's not an answer. And Jakar, he puts it rather nicely. He basically says, no, it is an answer, it's just not the answer you expected or the answer that you wanted. And he said to her that he said earlier that no one on the station's exactly what they appear to be. And he says there was nothing in it for him in terms of letting her crash to a fiery death on a random planet. And so he made a choice, and he chose to take an action which saved her, so that the commander wouldn't be upset for no good reason. So Sakai then goes on to question him about the entity, for want of a better description, that she encountered that caused her to have problems. And so Jakar points at a flower on a nearby stall and points out an ant and asks what it is. And Sakai says it's an ant, and that some of them get on board the station because they can't stop all of them, basically, because of the so many shipments from Earth. And so Jakar picks up the ant on his glove and puts it down on the flower again, and asks Sakai what she thinks the ant just made of that experience. And so it's a rather nice analogy, I think. And Jakar basically says that there are things in this universe that are billions of years older than either of our races, and that they're a mystery, and that he's both terrified and reassured by there still being things out there that they just don't understand. And so the episode actually closes on a close-up shot of the ant, and it's a nice way to round it off. I think we've been introduced to a lot of information here about how Psi Corps operates, who and what the Psi Cops are there for, and we do have this indication that Psi Corps may not be quite as docile and nice and helpful as perhaps people think that they are, because there's this suggestion that they are quietly manufacturing a sort of a coup of sorts behind the scenes, and clearly they are vastly empowered but don't have the numbers to really do a huge amount about it at the moment, but they can, if they so choose, exert quite a large amount of influence over the way that Earth is governed, if they so choose. And we also see again here there's another layer added to the Babylon 5 universe by this episode, which is another arc episode, because this is the first indication that we've had that there are beings out there in the universe who we do not regularly see on the show. So there are sort of wild cards out there that we just don't know a great deal about, but who we do encounter from time to time. And I think that's nice. It adds a nice sort of depth of detail to the show. We already know that Earth is out there sort of looking at older races that have ceased to be in the quest for new technology, and this is clearly just another risk in terms of what Earth is doing in trying to expand itself, because most ships need jump gates to get around. So there is clear need for people like Sakai to be out there trying to find more resources so that Earth can build and maintain more of these jump gates. So it's another really good, strong universe building episode. There's a lot of nice effects work in here, which I think for the time, again, is, you know, it's more than adequate, and it's all CG generated as well. And it's, for a TV show at the time, it's impressively done. I mean, how they managed to keep ahead of themselves in doing all these effects, I have no idea, but they managed it. And I guess, you know, they had to. I think some of the shows like Born to the Purple weren't particularly effects heavy, so I guess they have time to build up effects, because I think they were shooting more than one episode at any given point in time. But there's some nice ship work here as well. So we see the Black Omega Star Furies with their very distinctive insignia on top at the start of the episode. See a nice transport ship. We see Sakai's survey vessel. So again, it's a very, very rich universe, and I'll probably come back to this point on a number of occasions. But it is a really nice, rich universe. So it's nice to see it again and have time to actually sort of look at the detail of it, rather than looking at it off a long play VHS recording as I used to in the past. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to pick up in this episode in terms of any more sort of the particular little details. I mean, it's quite nice to see a sort of there's sort of like a real estate agent on the station for quarters that people can rent if they're just visiting Babylon 5, because fundamentally it is a place of commerce, a place of business deals being done. And really the whole point of Talia being on the station is that she isn't part of the command crew, that she's there to sort of facilitate the commercial aspects of things. So I liked Mind War. I think I liked it because it was opening up the universe and showing, you know, sort of what Sakai's job actually was, and that, you know, she was able to pilot her own ship. I think that appealed to me as someone who played Elite in the past. I liked the fact that she was in charge of her own ship and could go off and earn credits by doing sort of spacey missions. I think that's appealed to me as a concept. But I was also intrigued by what she found at Sigma 957 and what appeared and what fairly rapidly thereafter disappeared. Because again, that was a really, really interesting design of ship, and sort of people who play Elite Dangerous now would probably think, yeah, hang on, that looks vaguely familiar in some respects, because, you know, these designs were really, really clever for their day. And it's a shame that Babylon 5 isn't perhaps better known, because it was pushing a lot of boundaries, I think, for a lot of aspects of its show, from the special effects to the music and everything else. So I think it's a really good, solid episode. Again, it's one that shows that the series is really sort of growing, having established all the sort of the core characters. We're now starting to see sort of onion layers on top of that core, as we discover more about the universe surrounding it. So that was one of my longer spiels. The arc episodes do take up a bit more time because they tend to be more sort of detail rich. So I'm not really going to apologise for that. You're either going to listen to this point or you're not. And if you haven't, you won't hear this. If you have, thank you. And I'm going to get on and reward myself with a small pile of Jaffa cakes now. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you on the next one.